I still remember the feeling of the heavy, polished mahogany door handle, cold, solid, a literal barrier between my current miserable life and the potential future where I wasn't constantly dodging the passive-aggressive emails of a man who thought wearing a tie made him a genius. My heart was doing this frantic samba against my ribs, right, but on the outside, I was all business casual and controlled breathing. This was it. This was the interview for the Senior Director of Operations role at Sterling Corp., the one that required a background check so deep they probably knew my high school crush's name. I smoothed down the non-existent wrinkles on my blazer, mentally rehearsed the answer to the classic, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" garbage, and pushed the door open. The room hit me like a blast of Arctic air conditioning and the sharp, sterile smell of expensive furniture polish. It was one of those sprawling corner offices, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows looking down on the ant-sized traffic of downtown, a view I'd always dreamed of having. 3 people were seated at a massive, oval conference table. There was Ms. Albright, the head of HR, a woman whose smile could either mean, "I love your quarterly reports," or "You're fired, clean out your desk," and Mr. Chun, the chief financial officer, who looked perpetually tired but was one of the sharpest minds I'd ever encountered. I knew them both from the general corporate ecosystem. They were the gatekeepers. And then, there was the third person. He was leaning back in his chair, one hand laced over his vest, a smirk slowly spreading across his face like a crack in the pavement. His eyes, usually squinted in permanent judgment when he looked at me across the cubicle wall, were wide with an expression that was a nauseating mix of shock, confusion, and utterly undisguised fury. It was Greg Henderson, my boss, the man whose job I was secretly, unknowingly interviewing for. The world stopped. The white noise of the air conditioner and the distant city traffic completely vanished. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears and a ridiculously loud click of my own sensible low-heel shoes as I walked toward the table. I felt the color drain from my face, then rush back in a scorching wave of pure adrenaline. It was like walking into a surprise party, except the surprise was finding the guest of honor was the executioner and the party was my career suicide. I watched him. He watched me. For a solid 5 seconds, the only sound was the scraping of his chair as he bolted upright, hands slamming down on the table, knocking over his expensive pen. "Jean, what are you doing here?" he sputtered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. I didn't even flinch. All the months of suppressed frustration, the late nights, the times he took credit for my projects, the absolute patronizing garbage he'd spewed at me, it all coalesced into a laser-focused beam of cold, professional rage. My inner self was doing a triumphant, manic dance, screaming, "I'm doing your job interview, you narcissist." But my face was a mask of serene professionalism. I offered a small, polite smile and held out my hand to Ms. Albright, who was now staring between us with the intensity of a spectator at a tennis match gone violently wrong. "Good morning, Ms. Albright, Mr. Chun. Thank you for having me. I'm Jean, and I'm here for the senior director interview." I turned my gaze back to Henderson, my smile somehow widening, completely ignoring his outburst. "Oh, Mr. Henderson. What a surprise. I didn't realize you were on the internal panel for this role. I look forward to your valuable input." The sheer audacity of my response, the way I had instantly flipped the script from caught to professional, seemed to stun him into silence. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He was completely derailed. Ms. Albright, bless her HR soul, cleared her throat and quickly took control. But the damage was done. The air was thick with tension, thick enough to choke on. The entire interview had been instantly transformed from a routine corporate evaluation into a gladiatorial fight for professional survival. I sat down, my legs shaking slightly under the table, but my posture rigid, my eyes locked on Ms. Albright. I felt like I was sitting on a ticking time bomb. How did this happen? When I first applied, the listing was external, for a competitor, or so I thought. This role, this desk, this view, it was his whole existence. And suddenly, here I was, not just applying for a better job, but applying for the one job that would utterly devastate him. I was here to take his crown. And let me tell you, if you're watching this right now, wherever you are, whatever time it is, I want you to pause for a second. Drop a comment below and tell me what city and time it is where you're watching this. I want to know who's on this crazy ride with me, because that moment, walking in and seeing my boss's face, was the single most viral-worthy, life-defining instance of pure professional shock and triumph I have ever experienced. It was the moment the old Gene died and the new Gene, the one who fought back, was born. Henderson's face, pale and slack-jawed, was the first sign that this was going to be the easiest, or the hardest, job interview of my life. Either way, I was going to win. I wasn't just there for a promotion, I was there for vengeance, served corporate cold. Let's rewind a bit, because to understand the nuclear fallout of before, you need to understand the relentless, soul-sucking reality that was my life on the corporate treadmill. My name is Jean, and before that interview, I was a senior financial analyst at Sterling Corporation. Sounds prestigious, right? The kind of title you put on your LinkedIn and feel a fleeting sense of professional validation. In reality, I was the human calculator, the spreadsheet whisperer, the one who could take 3 disparate data sets and not only make them sing, but also project their future earnings for the next decade. I was good, like the kind of good that management relies on for their bonuses. But being good, in that particular corner of the corporate world, didn't earn you respect or a raise. It just earned you more work. The setting was a vast, open-plan office in a high-rise glass tower, all minimalist design, exposed ductwork, and too many standing desks. It looked like the future, but it felt like a highly optimized, air-conditioned prison. My little patch of real estate was by the window, which sounds nice, but it meant I got the full, searing blast of the afternoon sun and the constant, distracting panoramic view of a city I was too busy working to enjoy. My backstory: I busted my butt through college, skipped the fun internships, and went straight into the grind. I believe in the meritocracy myth: work hard, be smart, and you'll be recognized. I had been at Sterling for 5 years, steadily climbing the ladder, or at least the first few rungs of it. My work was impeccable. I routinely fixed the mistakes of the team above me, including, frequently, the mistakes of my boss, Greg Henderson. Henderson? Ugh. Just saying his name makes me need a vacation. He was the classic middle manager who had peaked a decade ago and was now just coasting on his title. He wore bespoke suits that were always just a little too tight, used business buzzwords he clearly didn't understand. He once asked us to pivot the synergy on a quarterly report, and most gratingly, believed his job was to manage us rather than the workflow. He was a micromanager with a massive ego. I remember this one small, incredibly relatable moment that perfectly sums up our dynamic. We had been working on this insanely complex acquisition projection for 3 straight weeks. I had been pulling 14-hour days. I finally handed him the final, spotless, 80-page presentation, complete with appendices. He didn't even open the file. He just leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and said, "Jean, I think you've done the heavy lifting, but let's make sure I get a proper review of the executive summary before we send it to the board. You know, just to add that executive polish." Executive polish. That was Henderson speak for. I will read the first page, change one font color, and then present it as my own work. It wasn't about the specific incident. It was the relentless, daily accumulation of those small thefts of credit, those casual dismissals of my competence, that was slowly chipping away at my soul. I tried to build an emotional connection with the few sane people in the office, but it was hard. The culture was fiercely competitive and siloed. My only real corporate ally was Sarah, who worked in HR, and her quirk was that she survived the corporate hellscape by strictly adhering to an unbreakable 5 p.m. clock-out rule, leaving her desk mid-sentence if the clock struck. She was the only one who truly understood my plight. "He called you a resource again, didn't he?" Sarah asked me one Tuesday, as we were both desperately trying to microwave lunch in the break room simultaneously. I sighed, pushing my plastic container of sadness salad into the humming box. Worse. He told me that my unique capacity for detail work frees up his bandwidth for strategic oversight. Sarah, my unique capacity, is literally doing his job for him. "Honey, your unique capacity is a superpower in the wrong hands," she replied, shaking her head. "It's what keeps him employed. He knows you'll never let a report go out with a mistake. You're his safety net." But the real, deep connection builder happened a few weeks before the interview. It was late. I was the last person left on the floor, doing yet another report that Henderson needed for a 7 a.m. meeting he wouldn't properly prepare for until 5 minutes before. I looked out the window at the dark city, the lights twinkling, and suddenly, I felt this crushing wave of exhaustion and resentment. I wasn't climbing the ladder, I was running in place on a corporate treadmill set to maximum speed by a lazy man. I was a brilliant machine, and I was being powered by his mediocrity. I walked over to the glass wall of his pristine, empty office. I looked at the dark wood, the ridiculous golf trophies, the picture of him shaking hands with the CEO, a picture I strongly suspected was photoshopped. The view from his window was exactly the same as mine, but the feeling of being in that corner office, that center of power, was entirely different. I imagined sitting there, not as the exhausted analyst, but as the decision-maker, the one who actually deserved the title. That night, I went home and for the first time in 5 years, I started updating my resume. Not with the tired optimism of someone looking for a slightly better job, but with the cold, clear focus of someone building a legal case against her oppressor. I wanted out, but more than that, I wanted justice. I wanted to prove the meritocracy wasn't entirely a myth and that a competent woman could rise, even if it meant knocking a mediocre man down a peg. It was time for Jean to move from the shadows of a spreadsheet to the harsh, bright lights of the corner office. I just didn't realize how literal that move was about to be. I was gearing up for war, but I was still waiting for the declaration. It arrived a week later, courtesy of Henderson himself. The declaration of war, the moment that finally snapped the last thread of my corporate loyalty, came not with a bang, but with the quiet, suffocating humidity of a mandatory one-on-one performance review. It was late August, and the air conditioning in Henderson's office was struggling, making the whole setting feel even more oppressive. This wasn't the usual year-end review. This was a mid-cycle check-in, which, in corporate speak, usually means, I'm going to tell you how indispensable I am by belittling how much I rely on you. I sat across from his large, imposing desk, clutching a meticulously prepared self-assessment that detailed my above-target achievements for the last 6 months. I'd single-handedly managed the integration of 3 new data platforms and saved the department an estimated $1.2 million in efficiency gains. I was ready to present the facts. Henderson, meanwhile, was flipping through my report like it was a magazine, stopping only to scribble something illegible in the margins with a ridiculously expensive fountain pen. "So, Jean," he began, without looking up, his voice dripping with forced gravitas. "Excellent work on the Q2 reports. Truly exhaustive. The detail is, well, it's exactly what we expect from you. Exactly what we expect." It was the backhanded compliment that launched 1,000 resignations. It meant, you met the baseline for my high expectations, which, by the way, are only high because I know I don't have to do the work myself. I try to keep my tone even. Thank you, Greg. I'm hoping that success, particularly the efficiency savings, positions me well for the new senior analyst opening on the M&A team that reports directly to Mr. Chun. I paused, letting the implication hang in the warm air. This was the logical next step in my career, a move up and away from his domain. He finally looked up, and his smile was a masterpiece of condescending patronization. It was the smile of a father correcting a child who'd confidently presented him with a crayon drawing of a cat that looked suspiciously like a deformed badger. "Ah, the M&A role. Bold, Jean. Very bold," he chuckled, leaning forward. "Look, let me be frank with you, because I value honesty above all else. A lie, naturally. You are an excellent analyst, a truly world-class doer. You get into the weeds, you deliver the flawless final product. That is your strength, and it is a strength this department needs. Now, that M&A role? That's about strategy, high-level negotiation, external relationships. Frankly, Jean, that's where you lose focus. You're more of an implementer. Implementer. A pretty word for a highly paid, brilliant cog. I felt the heat rising in my neck. He was boxing me in, defining my entire professional value as being confined to the 4 walls of his department and his spreadsheets. I pushed back, politely but firmly. With respect, Greg, the implementation of those new data platforms required significant strategic planning, coordination across 3 continents, and involved direct negotiation with vendors, which is exactly the skill set that role requires. I managed that entire project end to end. He waved his hand dismissively, an action so arrogant it made my blood boil. Details. You missed my larger point, Jean. And this is important, so listen closely. No one is irreplaceable, especially not at your level. You are a highly skilled component in a very large machine. If you left tomorrow, it would be inconvenient. Yes, but we would post the job, find another high-achieving, detail-oriented analyst, and in 3 months, no one would notice you were gone. It's the nature of this beast, darling. We are all interchangeable parts. No one is irreplaceable, especially not at your level. The phrase hung in the thick air between us, heavy and toxic. It wasn't just a general corporate platitude. It was a specific, personalized dismissal of 5 years of dedication, sacrifice, and brilliance. It was a calculated attempt to keep me small, to ensure I stayed put and continued to provide the flawless final product that he would put his name on. It was a direct insult to my worth. I didn't say anything immediately. I just looked at him, absorbing the cruelty, letting the words sink in and solidify into a cold, hard resolve. I remember noticing a small smudge on his ridiculously clean glass desk, a tiny, insignificant flaw in his perfect, self-serving world. I thought, you think I'm replaceable? Fine. Let's test that theory. I stood up, gathering my papers with slow, deliberate movements. I didn't argue further about the M&A role. I didn't make a scene. I just met his smug gaze with an icy calm that completely unnerved him. Thank you for the candid feedback, Greg. That's certainly valuable perspective, I said, emphasizing the word valuable with just the right touch of professional sarcasm that would sail right over his head. I walked out of his office, but the girl who walked in was gone. She was the one who believed in hard work and loyalty. The woman who walked out was a newly minted corporate operative, driven by a powerful, simmering need for cosmic justice. The treadmill was off. The game was on. If I was replaceable, then so was he. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that while finding another senior analyst like me would be difficult, finding another senior director as utterly useless as Greg Henderson would be the easiest job Sterling Corp had ever done. The only problem was, I wasn't just going to look for another job. I was going to look for his job, and that's exactly what I started doing the very next morning. The moment I returned to my cubicle after that soul-crushing review, the entire office environment changed for me. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was the launching pad for a personal mission. Henderson's words, "No one is irreplaceable, especially not at your level," hadn't crushed my spirit. They had forged it into a weapon. The rage fueled me, but it was channeled into a focused, highly analytical determination, the secret job search. I knew I couldn't just apply for any old job. A lateral move to a competitor would prove his point, that I was an interchangeable cog, easily absorbed by another machine. My move had to be massive. It had to be undeniable. It had to be a slap in the face to the entire corporate structure that allowed mediocrity like Henderson to thrive. I decided I wasn't just aiming for a promotion, I was aiming for a statement. So, my job search was instantly narrowed to only the highest level roles, Senior Director, VP, Chief of Staff, roles that required the blend of detailed execution and strategic oversight that Henderson claimed I lacked. I wasn't just looking for something I could do, I was looking for something that required the skills he had been exploiting for years. The process of the covert job search was grueling. Imagine running a highly demanding, full-time job while simultaneously running a second, equally demanding, highly confidential side business. Every lunch break was spent researching firms and crafting custom cover letters. Every bathroom trip was a chance to frantically check my burner email for recruiter responses. My phone, which usually lived on silent on my desk, was now an object of extreme paranoia. I started referring to it as the enemy because any unexpected buzz could be the sound of my life blowing up. The morale-draining part came from the realization that even at the highest levels, the job application process is a black hole. I'd spend hours tailoring my CV, highlighting specific multi-million-dollar wins that Henderson, of course, took credit for in public, only for the application to vanish into the algorithmic void. It was the lowest point of the whole endeavor, sitting late at night, staring at a laptop screen, feeling the weight of the corporate establishment pushing back, whispering, "You are replaceable, Jean. Just give up. But then, I would remember the look on Henderson's face, the wave of his dismissive hand, and the internal fire would roar back. I wasn't just doing this for my career. I was doing this for every brilliant woman stuck working for a mediocre man. This wasn't a job search. It was an act of rebellion. I developed an elaborate system to keep the whole thing secret. All communication was done through a dedicated, untraceable VPN on my personal laptop, never on company Wi-Fi. All interview prep materials were saved under ridiculous file names on a password-protected external hard drive, like Aunt Millie's cookie recipes or Crocodile Dung sunscreen research, which was a fake product name I'd made up years ago to disguise a risky project. Yes, remember that Crocodile Dung sunscreen? The name was stupid, but the security protocol was genius. My calendar entries for phone screens were all marked as dental appointment or dry cleaning pickup. The hardest part was the small talk with Henderson. He, of course, was oblivious, floating on the toxic cloud of his own self-importance. "Jean, I need you to run the Q3 forecast model again," he'd saunter into my space and announce. "But this time, I want you to make the variance projections look a little more optimistic. You know, executive-friendly." I would smile serenely, nodding, all the while thinking, I'm not just running your model, Greg. I'm running a highly sophisticated, multi-pronged campaign to take your corner office. The irony of the situation deepened the conflict. The better I performed at my current job, the more flawless my reports, the more insightful my analyses, the more fuel I was adding to my own resume. I was essentially creating the perfect professional case for my own escape, and I was being paid by the very man I was plotting to overthrow. The secondary challenge here wasn't just finding a job. It was maintaining a flawless public performance while dealing with the intense moral dilemma of actively betraying the trust of my employer. But the truth was that trust had been violated first by years of exploitation and disrespect. One particularly tense day, I had a secret midday phone interview scheduled. I told Henderson I had a long overdue dentist appointment and booked a conference room in a building across the street, pretending I was working remotely for an hour. The interview was going well, and I was feeling confident. Then, I got a text from Sarah in HR. "Henderson saw you leave with your purse at 11:30. He's asking around. Be careful." Panic flared up, hot and immediate. He wasn't suspicious of me leaving for an interview, but for abandoning my desk. His paranoia wasn't about my professional ambition. It was about his need to control my physical location. The moral dilemma of the double life intensified, but so did the rising tension. I cut the interview short, raced back, and calmly walked into the office carrying a bag from a nearby coffee shop, telling Henderson I had just stepped out for a much-needed caffeine refill and had to walk to the good place because the office coffee was garbage. He accepted it, but his eyes narrowed. He was looking for cracks. And I realized that the danger wasn't just getting caught. The real danger was letting my stress compromise my impeccable work quality. I had to be perfect, both as his analyst and as the future director. The stakes were impossibly high, but the moment I realized the ultimate ambition, to get his job, the fear receded, replaced by the thrilling, intoxicating lure of justice. The covert operation continued, fueled by coffee and vengeance. And soon, the universe would respond with an opportunity so brazen, so perfectly tailored to my secret mission, that it would make the hair stand up on the back of my neck. The universe, it turns out, has a wickedly dark sense of humor, and it decided to escalate my secret mission from a simple escape plan to a direct confrontation with destiny. I had been throwing my application out into the corporate ether for weeks, targeting high-level roles with the single-minded focus of a predator. Most of the responses were the automated, soul-crushing rejections I mentioned before, but one Monday afternoon, my enemy, phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I quickly retreated to the dry cleaning pickup conference room, the one 2 blocks away that I used for covert operations. I answered, my voice deliberately neutral, professional, and entirely detached. "Hello, this is Jean." The voice on the other end was smooth, confident, and utterly charming, the kind of voice that costs $5,000 to hire for a recruiting firm. "Hello, Jean. My name is Marcus Vance, and I'm a senior talent acquisition partner with Pinnacle Executive Search. I'm reaching out to you regarding a highly confidential role that was referred to us by one of our key client partners." Highly confidential. That was the magic word. It instantly signaled that this was not a standard LinkedIn scroll and apply situation. This was the big leagues. I appreciate you reaching out, Marcus. What kind of role are we discussing? I asked, already mentally reviewing my cover story in case Henderson tried to call my desk. Marcus paused for dramatic effect. It's a senior director of operations role. It requires an extremely unique blend of analytical depth, executive presence, and a proven track record of significant efficiency gains. Your profile, Jean, stood out immediately. The person who referred you, they used the word unparalleled to describe your grasp of corporate finance. My heart hammered. Unparalleled. That sounded like Sarah, my HR ally, or maybe even Mr. Chun, the CFO, who I knew appreciated my work despite Henderson's attempts to filter it. The idea that people at the executive level were aware of my competence, around Henderson's noise, was instantly validating. That's very flattering, I managed, trying to sound cool while my internal monologue was shouting yes. Tell me more about the job that will finally get me out of here. Marcus continued, detailing the role. It was at a major, publicly traded firm. He gave vague descriptions of the industry, high-level asset management with a focus on technology integration, which could honestly describe half the buildings in the city. The requirements were intense, leading a team of 50, managing a $20 million budget, and reporting directly to the C-suite. Everything he described was exactly what I had been doing, unofficially, for Henderson for 5 years, but this time with the proper title and the proper compensation. Then came the unusual urgency. The client is moving extremely fast on this, Marcus explained. They had an unexpected internal shift, and they need this position filled yesterday. We're compressing the interview timeline significantly. They want to start first-round interviews within the week. Unexpected internal shift. That phrase was like a tiny, irritating itch at the back of my mind. In the corporate world, unexpected internal shift is code for someone important was fired, resigned in a blaze of glory, or was quietly escorted out by security. But I was too focused on the opportunity to dwell on the potential office drama at a rival firm. That sounds excellent, Marcus. I'm certainly interested in hearing more about the client and the compensation structure, I said. He chuckled. The compensation is extremely competitive, Jean. Think significant 6 figures, plus equity and a signing bonus. As for the client, they prefer to maintain a high level of discretion at this stage. You understand. They are looking for someone who can step in without disruption. You would be entering an environment that needs immediate stabilization and leadership. The secrecy and the urgency were red flags, but they were also incredibly tempting. It painted a picture of a company in crisis, needing a quiet, brilliant fixer, and I knew, definitively, that I was that fixer. The combination of mystery and high stakes was exactly what I needed to override the draining routine of my daily life. I spent the rest of the day in a state of high-alert excitement, secretly reviewing everything I could find about Pinnacle Executive Search's clients in the region, trying to narrow down the target firm. Every major corporation was a suspect. I felt like a spy, analyzing every detail of my surroundings. Meanwhile, back at Sterling, the atmosphere started feeling strange, too. I noticed a distinct, palpable tension in the air, a subtle background hum of stress that went beyond the usual quarterly crunch. Henderson was jumpier than usual, spending long, closed-door hours with Ms. Albright from HR, the same woman who was on the interview panel, as I would soon find out. But I didn't know that yet. He was barking orders, his tie was perpetually loosened, and he smelled faintly of desperation and stale coffee. He came over to my desk that afternoon, looking pale. Jean, I need you to drop everything and prepare a comprehensive, 10-year earnings forecast for the entire division. I need it by 9 a.m. tomorrow. It needs to be flawless. I raised an eyebrow. A 10-year forecast, Greg? That's typically a project for the finance director. And it's 4 p.m. Don't question me, Jean. Just do it. It's for a very sensitive, high-level presentation, he snapped, running a hand through his hair. It's essential. Utterly essential. I need your, unparalleled detail work on this one. He used the word unparalleled with a bizarre, almost frantic emphasis. I didn't realize it then, but that unexpected internal shift Marcus had mentioned, and Henderson's sudden, desperate request for a 10-year forecast, a clear sign that someone was asking hard questions about the division's future, were two pieces of the exact same puzzle. The gravitational pull of my new job and the instability of my current one were converging. I was being pulled into a vortex that centered on the single most irreplaceable thing at Sterling Corp, Greg Henderson's job title. And I was about to find out just how replaceable he truly was. The closer I got to the interview with Pinnacle Executive Search, the more obvious the cracks started to appear in Henderson's perfect, self-serving corporate facade. The unexpected internal shift Marcus had mentioned wasn't just happening at some unnamed competitor. The shift was happening right under my nose at Sterling, and Greg Henderson was clearly at the epicenter of the tremor. I started seeing the first sign of trouble about 3 days after Marcus's call. Henderson, normally a creature of smug routine, arriving precisely at 8:45 a.m., leaving precisely at 5:05 p.m., and taking a mandated hour for lunch, was now a wreck. His designer suits were rumpled. He was showing up before 8 a.m., looking like he'd slept in his clothes, and skipping lunch entirely, subsisting on stale vending machine protein bars. The clearest sign, however, involved his interactions with senior leadership. He started having frequent, unscheduled, and very tense meetings with people who normally wouldn't give him the time of day, Mr. Chun, the CFO, and Mr. Davies, the Chief Operating Officer. These weren't the usual, breezy, sign-off on my brilliant report meetings. They were whispered, frantic huddles near the corner office, punctuated by sharp, frustrated gestures from the executives and Henderson's pathetic, nodding deference. One afternoon, I was walking past the executive conference room, the one with the expensive frosted glass that usually gave you privacy, and I saw Mr. Chin leaning over the table, pointing sharply at a printed report. Henderson was standing on the opposite side, shoulders slumped, looking utterly deflated. I only caught one phrase, but it was enough to stop me dead in my tracks. Chen's voice was low and dangerous. "If you can't guarantee these figures, Greg, we have a catastrophic exposure." Catastrophic exposure. That's not normal corporate language for a slight dip in quarterly earnings. That's the language of a serious, career-ending problem. My mind immediately flashed to the 10-year earnings forecast Henderson had desperately demanded from me a few days earlier. He hadn't asked for it to look optimistic anymore. He'd asked for it to be perfectly accurate, right down to the decimal. It suddenly clicked. He hadn't been generating those 10-year reports. I had. I was the one who built the models and made the projections. And if there was a catastrophic exposure, it was likely rooted in a flaw in his prior, unchecked, optimistic reporting, a flaw that my deep dive work would now be called upon to either fix or expose. The layered conflict deepened. I was still covertly pursuing the new job, but now, I was also the only person who possessed the data that could either save Henderson's career or quite literally end it. I felt a strange moral dilemma. Should I use my position to subtly highlight his incompetence, or should I just do my job flawlessly and let his past mistakes catch up to him naturally? I decided on the latter. My goal was justice, not sabotage. But justice sometimes looks a lot like a meticulously organized spreadsheet. At the same time, I started noticing strange things happening to my job responsibilities. My tasks were slowly being shifted. Projects that were intrinsically mine, like managing the interdepartmental budget reconciliation, were being quietly reassigned to a junior associate in the accounting department, a guy named Kevin who I knew couldn't handle the complexity. I confronted Henderson about it during a weekly check-in. "Greg, I noticed the budget reconciliation task was moved to Kevin. Is there a reason for that? I've handled that for the last 3 years." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was shuffling papers on his desk, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm. "Oh, that? Yes. Well, Gene, you're becoming too valuable for simple administrative tasks. I need you to focus on the high-level analysis. I need your mind freed up. Consider it a promotion in responsibility, if you will. A promotion in responsibility without the corresponding title or pay. Classic Henderson. But I knew that was garbage. He wasn't freeing up my mind. He was subtly removing me from core operational duties. The real reason? He was trying to minimize the potential disruption when I inevitably left. He was acknowledging, in his own cowardly way, that I was not replaceable, at least, not without a significant effort. He was preemptively trying to spread my workload out so that when the analyst me, who had been doing the director's job, finally departed, the system wouldn't collapse immediately. This realization was terrifying and validating at the same time. The fact that he was already contingency planning for my departure meant my application for the M&A role, or any move, had registered as a serious threat. It was a secondary challenge, how to navigate the office while he was actively trying to make me obsolete before I even had the new job confirmed, without letting my performance slip. The rising tension in the office was almost unbearable. Everyone felt it, but no one knew the source. They just knew Henderson was scared, and I, the analyst in the cubicle, was the only one with all the pieces to the corporate puzzle. Then, the final piece of the puzzle arrived. I got an email from Marcus Vance at Pinnacle, the executive recruiter. It was the confirmation for the in-person interview, and it contained all the specifics, the address, the time, and the names of the panel members. I opened the attachment, heart pounding, expecting the address of the rival firm. But the address was the same as my office building. Specifically, it was the address for the 42nd floor, the C-suite. My floor was 38. The client was Sterling Corporation. The role was Senior Director of Operations. I scrolled down to the list of panel members. Amelia Albright, Head of HR. David Chun, Chief Financial Officer. Greg Henderson, Senior Director of Operations, departing. The world spun. Henderson wasn't just on the panel, he was listed as the departing Senior Director of Operations. I wasn't applying for a similar job at a competitor. I was applying for his job, the one he had said I wasn't ready for, the one he had told me I was too implementer for, the one he had just implied was necessary to stabilize the catastrophic exposure, the one that would put me in the corner office looking down on the city while he was on the way out. My hands were shaking, so hard I had to put the laptop down. The sheer, unbelievable twist of fate, or maybe the meticulously engineered, executive-level termination plan that I was now a part of, was staggering. I had walked into my own job search looking for an escape. I was walking into this interview with a bulldozer, ready to level the existing structure and take the foundation. The turning point wasn't the review, it was this email. The game just became lethal. The email from Marcus Vance, confirming the details of the interview, didn't just contain a revelation, it contained a bomb. Reading Greg Henderson, Senior Director of Operations, departing. Next to my name for the interview panel was the professional equivalent of finding out your nemesis is voluntarily handing you the keys to the kingdom. This wasn't a job search anymore, it was an act of corporate destiny. The role was Senior Director of Operations. At Sterling Corporation, my current employer. The address was the 42nd floor, the exclusive C-suite territory. It confirmed everything, the secrecy, the urgency, the unexpected internal shift. Henderson hadn't been fired yet, but the groundwork was laid. The interview for his replacement was scheduled, and I, the replaceable implementer, was the prime candidate. The discovery ignited a fierce, exhilarating energy inside me. It was like I had been practicing scales for years, and now I was suddenly thrust onto the stage of the opera house. I understood, in a flash, why Henderson had been a wreck, why he'd been pulled into tense meetings, and why he'd suddenly panicked about the accuracy of those tenure reports. He was under review, and his previous pattern of covering up problems with optimistic data had finally caught up to him. He was being managed out. And now, in a final, brutal twist of corporate irony, he had to sit on the panel to select his own replacement. My initial, frantic thought was, how do I handle this? The moral dilemma that had been simmering now reached a full rolling boil. Should I mention the email to Henderson, try to maintain some kind of professional decorum, and risk him completely derailing the process out of spite? Absolutely not. My silence was my biggest strategic advantage. He would walk into that interview room expecting a competent, but likely external, candidate. He would never in a million years expect me. The secondary challenge here was the sheer scale of the opportunity. I wasn't just getting out of his supervision, I was taking over his supervision. The responsibility was immense, leading the department I knew intimately, but from the top, where the real, structural flaws lay. The role was his, but the responsibility was mine. This was the full unmasking the opportunity. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of hyper-focused preparation that bordered on mania. I pulled up every single report Henderson had ever taken credit for, every mistake I had quietly corrected, every project where he provided executive polish. I knew the job better than he did, not because I had the title, but because I had been the one actually doing the hard, detailed work. I was preparing not just for an interview, but for an internal forensic audit of my own department's failures, which all led back to Greg Henderson. I remembered the sheer exhaustion of that late night, staring out of my window, wishing for a change. I remembered Sarah's comment about my superpower in the wrong hands. Now I was about to wield that superpower, my unparalleled grasp of the details, to change my entire future. I realized I didn't need to try and sound like a senior director. I needed to sound like Jean, the person who had been flawlessly acting as the senior director for years. My advantage was authenticity, coupled with a terrifying amount of data. I reached out to Sarah in HR, very casually, about the senior director of operations role, pretending I had seen the external posting and was considering a friend for it. Sarah, what's the real story there? Why is Greg leaving? Sarah lowered her voice over the phone, though she was working from home. It's messy, Jean. But look, off the record, he overpromised on the Q4 projections last year, and they relied on his numbers for a major capital investment. The numbers were, let's just say, highly polished. They've been trying to cover the catastrophic exposure, but the C-suite found out he was masking the core problem. They need a stabilizer. Someone who actually understands the data. That's all I can say. Highly polished. Another euphemism for a lie. It was perfect. My internal decision to let his mistakes catch up to him had been the right one. I didn't have to fabricate a narrative, I just had to present the unvarnished truth that was already reflected in the numbers. The final detail in the email was the most profound. My interview was the last one of the day. It was the final check before the decision. I would be walking in right when the panel was tired, hungry, and ready to be impressed, or completely fed up. The night before the interview, I couldn't sleep. The rising tension was physical. I felt like a coiled spring. I got up, went to my kitchen, and started pacing. I thought about the core conflict. Henderson had defined my professional worth as replaceable. I was about to prove him wrong by replacing him. It was the ultimate, poetic reversal. I walked into the office that morning, the day of the interview, wearing the same blazer I'd worn to the first dry cleaning pickup phone screen. I felt like I was wearing a suit of armor. I made a point of crossing paths with Henderson in the hallway. He was stressed, but still trying to maintain his executive swagger. Morning, Jean. Big day. Make sure you get that variance report to me by noon, no later. Absolutely, Greg, I replied, my voice calm, my smile serene. I'm on top of it. You can count on my work always being flawless. I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. He assumed I was still the dependable analyst. He had no idea that I wasn't just completing his report. I was compiling the final evidence for his professional termination, and that he would be my primary audience in a few hours. I headed to the 42nd floor, ready for the showdown. The walk from the 38th floor to the 42nd floor in the Sterling Corp Tower was surreal. It was only 4 stories, a few elevator rides, but it felt like I was crossing a continental divide. That morning, I had been the analyst in the cubicle, worried about Henderson's noon deadline. Now, I was the candidate for the corner office, about to face the man who told me I was easily replaceable. The pre-interview panic was a real, physical thing, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. I stepped off the elevator onto the 42nd floor. It was quieter, the lighting softer, the carpet thicker, a world away from the frantic energy of the operational floors below. I checked in with a polite, impossibly calm executive assistant who offered me sparkling water in a crystal glass. I was instructed to wait in a luxurious, hushed seating area with actual leather couches. I sat down and forced myself to breathe, performing a mental checklist. My biggest struggle wasn't the technical questions. I knew the data backward and forward. The panic stemmed from the monumental decision to proceed and risk my entire professional life. This wasn't just a career change, it was an active confrontation with my current boss. If I didn't get the job, my career at Sterling was over, and Henderson, fueled by spite, would make sure my professional exit was as painful as possible. I was betting everything on my own competence and the executive's desire for stability. I pulled out my printed notes, ostensibly about my background, but in reality, they were a roadmap of Henderson's failures and how I would fix them. I had named this document Project Phoenix. The moral dilemma was intensely personal now. Did I owe Henderson anything? 5 years of loyalty, 5 years of making him look good, 5 years of biting my tongue while he stole credit. His dismissal of my worth, the especially me comment, had erased any obligation I might have felt. I wasn't going in to ruin him. I was going in to present the truth of his failed leadership to the people who were already prepared to fire him. I was simply making the obvious choice inevitable and fast. I thought back to that conversation about the crocodile dung sunscreen research, the absurd, highly secure file name for my crucial data. The memory of that ridiculous name actually made me smile, breaking the tension for a moment. It was a needed dose of humor and a reminder that even in this high-stakes corporate environment, I was still myself, the detail-oriented analyst who secured her data with jokes. Suddenly, I heard a door open and close down the hall, followed by raised voices. It was Mr. Chun and Ms. Albright. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was frustrated and urgent. This reinforced the urgency Marcus had mentioned. They weren't just interviewing, they were desperate. They needed a fixer, and they needed one now. Then a new voice, Henderson's. It was strained, high-pitched, and whining. But Amelia, surely you see that Jean is a mid-level analyst. This is a senior director role. She has no executive management experience outside of. The rest was muffled, but the damage was done. Henderson knew I was interviewing. He was already trying to sabotage me before I even walked in. He had either seen my name on the final panel list or, more likely, he had been trying to argue his way off the panel entirely and had inadvertently confirmed the worst. The confrontation had officially started, and it was happening out of my sight. A different kind of resolve washed over me. The fear dissolved into icy clarity. His words, mid-level analyst, were the final insult. They were the cue. My goals shifted from merely getting the job to completely owning the room. I wasn't just there to win. I was there to deliver a performance review on Henderson's entire tenure. The door to the large conference room opened, and Ms. Albright, looking stressed but composed, appeared. Jean, we're ready for you. I stood up. I took a final, deep breath, adjusting my blazer one last time. I walked toward the door, my sensible heels clicking quietly on the plush carpet. I was no longer Jean the analyst. I was Jean the contender. I was carrying 5 years of his incompetence and my excellence into that room. I was ready to replace him. As I walked in, my eyes locked on Henderson. He was seated in the middle, his face pale and contorted, his tie slightly askew. He looked like a man watching his life flash before his eyes, knowing the final, fatal scene was about to begin. I remember the triumphant shock from Section 1, and now I felt the professional rage that fueled it. This was the moment of rising tension, the culmination of all the secret preparation, all the moral wrestling, and all the suppressed resentment. The fight for my professional life and his professional demise was on. I walked into the room, the click of my heels on the marble floor sounding strangely loud and resolute. The high-stakes interrogation began immediately, but not in the way they intended. The interview was supposed to be about me, but the first 5 minutes were entirely about the seismic shock of my presence. Ms. Albright, head of HR, managed to recover first, offering a strained professional smile. Welcome, Jean. Please, have a seat. I settled into the chair, placing my notebook and pen neatly on the table. My posture was straight, my gaze unyielding. I didn't look at Henderson, but I could feel the heat of his intense, furious stare boring into the side of my head. Mr. Chen, the CFO, looked genuinely intrigued, his usual weariness momentarily replaced by fascination. Ms. Albright began the standard pleasantries, but Henderson couldn't contain himself. He leaned forward, his voice a low, hostile growl. Amelia, with all due respect, I need to understand why we are interviewing a mid-level analyst for a senior director role. Jean, this is highly unconventional. Your application for this role was never submitted through the proper internal channels, as required by policy. I believe there has been a significant error. I looked directly at him. Finally, his face was a mask of professional outrage, barely concealing pure panic. I had to establish dominance right now. I decided to use the external recruiters referral as my shield. With all due respect, Greg, I replied, my voice calm and perfectly measured. My application was initiated through Pinnacle Executive Search, a highly reputable external firm contracted by Sterling Corp to fill this specific urgent role. I believe Marcus Vance, the senior talent partner, has vetted my qualifications extensively, which is why I am sitting here. I follow the process as instructed by the external search firm. If there's an internal procedural conflict, I trust that's an issue for HR and the search firm to resolve, not the candidate. I had just weaponized the very system they had put in place to manage his exit. Ms. Albright's eyes widened slightly. I knew she was relieved I hadn't exposed the external listing drama, and she quickly jumped in. That's correct, Greg. Pinnacle referred Jean as a highly promising candidate. Now let's move on to the core of the role, shall we? She shot Henderson a look that clearly communicated, sit down and shut up. The formal part of the interview began. Mr. Chun, focusing on the strategic and financial requirements, asked a series of highly complex questions about long-term risk management and budget reallocation. This was my playground. I didn't just answer the questions. I answered them with specific, irrefutable data points, almost all of which came from the reports I had generated while Henderson was polishing his golf trophies. Mr. Chun, you mentioned the need to stabilize the division's Q4 exposure. As I detailed in the comprehensive 10-year forecast I completed last week, the one that utilized the new Monte Carlo model, the risk isn't in the reallocation, it's in the initial valuation of Asset Group C. By moving the depreciation schedule from straight line to double declining balance for that specific group, we can immediately offset $3 million in Q4 liability and create a more conservative, but ultimately more accurate, earnings outlook for Q1. Mr. Chin actually stopped writing. That forecast was yours, Jean? I saw Henderson's name on the cover page. I smiled sadly. The analysis and the model were mine, Mr. Chin. As senior analyst, it was my responsibility to provide the necessary detail. It was a perfect, subtle dig that implicated Henderson without me having to overtly accuse him of stealing credit. It highlighted his reliance on me and my deep understanding of the actual problems. Henderson, livid, saw his opportunity to undermine me. He cut in, his tone sharp and critical. Jean, the senior director role, isn't about running models. It's about people. It's about leadership. You've never managed a large team. You've never had a reporting staff of 50. How do you intend to lead a large, diverse team when your experience is solely in the weeds as a detail-oriented implementer? This was the core of his dismissal, the especially me insult. He was attacking the very definition of my worth. I took a deep breath, ready to turn his own condescending words into a weapon. That's an excellent and fair question, Greg, and I appreciate your focus on leadership. I began, making sure to project my voice clearly. You're absolutely right that I haven't officially held the title of director. However, I have been informally leading this team for over 2 years. When the data platforms were integrated, who trained the analysts across 3 departments? Me. When your second-in-command was on extended leave, who stepped up to manage the daily workflow, set the project priorities, and mentor the junior staff? Me. I leaned slightly forward. The difference between being an implementer, Greg, and being a leader is that a true leader understands that the detail is the strategy. You cannot successfully manage a $20 million budget if you don't know the models intimately. You cannot lead a team of 50 people if you can't get down in the weeds to understand and fix their challenges. My strength isn't just in the analysis, it's in the fact that I understand the entire operation from the ground up. I know where the risks are because I built the system. You, on the other hand, Greg, have relied on your title and assumed the details would manage themselves, which, as we are now seeing, has resulted in a catastrophic exposure that a true senior director should have prevented. The silence that followed was deafening. I had done it. I had not just answered his question, I had exposed his core professional failure to his superiors, using his own data and his own words. Mr. Chun and Ms. Albright exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Game. Set and match. The interrogation was over. The immediate aftermath of my mic drop moment in Section 9, where I directly connected Henderson's reliance on his title to the catastrophic exposure crisis, was a thick, almost painful silence. It was the moment the corporate showdown became less of an interview and more of a public accountability meeting. Mr. Chun, the CFO, was the first to break the tension. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, almost appreciative nod creasing his tired face. "Gene," he said, his voice quiet but carrying immense weight. "That was a profoundly candid assessment. And your analysis, specifically concerning Asset Group C, aligns precisely with the risk assessment my team conducted yesterday. The fact that you identified that specific failure point and offered a concrete solution demonstrates an understanding of the division's strategic challenges that goes beyond what we typically see at the director level." Henderson, meanwhile, was turning a shade of purple that clashed horribly with his expensive silk tie. He looked like he was about to spontaneously combust. He couldn't attack my data. Chin had just validated it. So, he did the only thing a cornered, mediocre manager can do. He resorted to personal, passive-aggressive attacks. "Gene, that's all well and good," Henderson spat, gripping the edge of the table. "But let's talk about your team player mentality. You're an implementer, yes, but you often work in isolation. I've had to frequently remind you about the importance of collaboration. A senior director needs to be an effective communicator, a motivator. How can we trust someone who often acts as a lone wolf to lead a team of 50? Where is your executive presence? You rarely even come to the optional social events." He was now attacking the small, relatable quirk from Section 2, my preference for focused work over mandatory office socializing. He was trying to frame my competence as a character flaw. I knew this attack was coming. He was trying to paint me as socially inept, the classic corporate maneuver to undermine a brilliant technical woman. But I was ready to turn that perceived weakness into a strength. "Greg, I believe effective communication is about clarity and results, not about attending every optional mixer." I countered smoothly, maintaining eye contact. "My lone wolf approach, as you call it, is actually my commitment to deep focus and accuracy. I work in isolation when I'm dealing with sensitive, multi-million-dollar forecasts because they demand zero distractions. That diligence is what prevents catastrophic exposure in the first place." I paused, letting that sink in, then delivered the final blow to his argument. "As for motivation and leadership, a leader motivates a team by removing obstacles and ensuring their work is valued. How do I intend to lead 50 people? By making sure the analysts under me get credit for their flawless work, unlike the current environment. I will lead with transparency, technical expertise, and an absolute commitment to accurate reporting. I won't just delegate and hope for the best. I will understand the work, support my team, and give them the credit they deserve." I glanced briefly at Ms. Albright. I knew the HR angle. Leadership isn't about glad-handing. It's about competence that inspires trust. And quite frankly, I believe my track record of producing accurate, strategic analysis over the last 5 years, despite the challenging management structure, speaks directly to my ability to lead and motivate a team that is currently running on fumes. That phrase, challenging management structure, was the cleanest, most professional way to say, your leadership is the problem, and everyone in the room knew it. Henderson's face crumpled. He knew he was utterly defeated. Every attempt to undermine me only served to highlight the profound contrast between his superficial management and my operational brilliance. The rest of the interview was a formality. Ms. Albright asked a few standard HR questions about managing conflict and strategic vision, which I answered by using specific examples of problems I had solved on my own, problems that, naturally, had been created by Henderson's lack of oversight. The rising drama reached its peak when Mr. Chin leaned forward, putting his pen down. "Gene, let's talk about the future. If you were to step into the senior director role tomorrow, what is the single, immediate change you would make to this division and why?" This was the question I had been preparing for since Section 7, the unmasking the opportunity. I didn't hesitate. The single immediate change would be to flatten the reporting structure and implement mandatory, randomized data validation checks on all executive summaries, I stated. Currently, the entire division is bottlenecked by a single managerial layer that is more concerned with optimistic optics than factual integrity. This not only demoralizes the analysts who do the real work, but, as we have seen, creates massive financial risk for the entire corporation. I met Henderson's desperate eyes one last time. I would cut the bureaucratic fat and ensure the people with the best data have a direct line to the C-suite. The days of management taking credit for work, they don't understand are over. With that, the interview was done. Ms. Albright closed her folder. Thank you for your time, Jean. We appreciate your candor. We will be in touch shortly. I stood up, offered a polite, professional handshake to Chin and Albright, and then turned to Henderson. He didn't offer his hand. He was slumped in his chair, defeated. Thank you, Greg. I truly value the experience I gained while working for you, I said, my voice dripping with double meaning. I walked out of the corner office, the massive glass door swinging shut behind me. The sense of relief was tidal, but the victory wasn't sealed yet. I had crushed the interview, but the ultimate decision still lay in the hands of the executives. I had just taken the biggest gamble of my professional life, and all I could do now was wait for the call. The next 3 days were a blur of professional performance and private agony. I had to go back to my cubicle and act as if nothing had happened, finishing the reports Henderson had demanded. He, on the other hand, was an absolute ghost. He avoided eye contact, stayed holed up in his office, and communicated only through curt, passive-aggressive emails. The rising drama was replaced by a taut, agonizing stillness, the corporate equivalent of the moment before the final axe drops. Then, on Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. Not the covert enemy phone, but my desk line. It was Miss Albright. My heart instantly started a frantic drum solo. I walked over to the furthest, least used part of the office, near the supply closet, to take the call, my voice tight. Hello, Miss Albright. Is everything all right? Her tone was warm, professional, and entirely focused. Jean, thank you for taking my call. I'm calling you on behalf of the hiring committee. We have reached a decision regarding the senior director of operations role. She paused, and in that pause, I felt 5 years of stress, late nights, and stolen credit flash through my mind. We were deeply impressed with your interview. Your ability to marry strategic vision with a granular understanding of the operational data, what you termed the detail as the strategy, was precisely what the C-suite determined was missing from the division's leadership, she continued. The board requires a steady hand, and more importantly, a truthful one. Therefore, Jean, I am delighted to inform you that we would like to offer you the position of Senior Director of Operations at Sterling Corporation. The decision and revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. A sudden, overwhelming euphoria mixed with a profound sense of vindication. I had done it. I had faced down the man who called me replaceable and taken his crown. Ms. Albright, that is wonderful news. I managed, fighting to keep my voice steady. I accept. Thank you so much. We quickly moved on to the technical details, salary, benefits, start date. The start date was set for the following Monday. We need a rapid transition, Jean, as you know, she said. After the call, I walked back to my desk in a state of professional shock, trying to appear normal while my brain was screaming with triumph. I didn't announce anything. I quietly logged off my computer, packed my personal items, including my Aunt Millie's cookie recipes external hard drive, and decided I couldn't leave the building without one final conversation. I needed to see his face and witness the final closure. I walked the few feet to Greg Henderson's office, my new senior director swagger already beginning to assert itself. His door was, as usual, slightly ajar. I knocked lightly once. Come in, he grumbled, not looking up from a folder. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The sound was soft but final. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his face exhausted. He clearly knew what was coming. The entire office had been waiting for the axe to fall. Jean, if this is about the Q3 projection variance, I need a minute, he said weakly. It's not, Greg, I said calmly. I walked over to his desk and stood directly opposite him. I've just spoken with Ms. Albright. He winced. He knew. Right. The M&A role. I told her it wasn't the right fit for you. Frankly, Jean, they need someone with more. I cut him off, my voice steady and low. No, Greg. Not the M&A role. I've accepted the offer for the Senior Director of Operations position. I start Monday. His face went utterly blank, then slowly contorted into a mask of utter, sickening realization. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly gray pallor. The look in his eyes wasn't just shock or even anger. It was total, career-ending devastation. He leaned back, breathing heavily. He didn't try to deny it. He just stared at the wall, then back at me. You were applying for my job? All this time. The secrecy. The recruiter call. That's why you knew everything about the Asset C exposure. You were here to replace me. I was here to find a job where my work was valued, Greg. I corrected him gently. When I started looking, I didn't know it was your job. But when I realized it was, I applied for it because I knew I was the most qualified person to fix the problems you created. And you knew it, too. He slumped forward, resting his elbows on his desk, his facade completely gone. The final, heartbreaking revelation came then, a moment of profound, dark clarity. You know why I said it, Jean, he whispered, his voice cracking. The whole replaceable thing? It was panic. Pure panic. I was told 6 months ago I needed to find a strong successor, someone to groom for my job. And I looked at you, the smartest, hardest worker I had, and I realized if you moved up, I wouldn't have you to cover my back anymore. You were too good, so I had to keep you small. I had to tell you were replaceable, so you wouldn't leave and expose my own mediocrity. I was the one who was replaceable, Jean. And I knew it. It was a pathetic, self-serving confession, but it held a kernel of truth. His condescension wasn't arrogance, it was fear. My value wasn't dismissed, it was hoarded. I didn't offer sympathy. I just nodded. Well, Greg, you were right. You were replaceable. And as of Monday, I'm the one doing the replacing. I turned and walked out of the office for the last time as an analyst. I didn't look back. The moral of the story was simple. Never let a mediocre man define your worth. The final chapter, the view from the top, was about to begin. The following Monday, I didn't take the elevator to the 38th floor. I went straight up to the new corner office view on the 42nd floor. Walking onto the C-suite level for the second time felt completely different. The first time, I was an interloper, a nervous contender. This time, I was the resident authority. The carpet still felt plush, the lighting still felt soft, but now, the environment felt like it was mine. The assistant who had given me sparkling water before now greeted me by my new title. Good morning, Director Jean. Your office is prepared. She led me down the quiet hallway, past the executive conference room where I'd had the showdown with Henderson, and right to the corner office. The office was everything the one on the 38th floor wasn't. Spacious, bright, and commanding. My predecessor's detritus had been completely cleared out. No ugly golf trophies. No framed picture of him shaking hands with the CEO. The slate was clean. I walked straight to the panoramic window, the one overlooking the sprawling city that I had been staring at for years, only this time, I was seeing it from the seat of power. The view was incredible. The sheer difference in perspective was breathtaking. I wasn't looking out of a cubicle. I was looking over the entire operation. Ms. Albright met me there with a welcoming packet. Welcome, Jean. You certainly made an impression on the panel. Mr. Chin is already excited about your plan to restructure the reporting process. He sees you as a stabilizer. I appreciate that, Ms. Albright, I said, finally able to fully relax the corporate guard I'd held up for months. What about Greg? What are his next steps? She sighed, a genuine, non-HR sigh. He's been given a severance package and an executive consultant title until his contract officially expires in 2 weeks. He won't be returning to the office. It was a clean, rapid exit, exactly what the board wanted. The fact that you were already an internal powerhouse made the transition seamless. You were the one person in this company who was, ironically, completely irreplaceable. That word, irreplaceable, it hung in the air, correcting the toxic lie Henderson had told me months ago. The man who had based his career on the idea that everyone below him was expendable had been the only one who was easily replaced. I spent my first day not organizing papers, but holding a mandatory, all-hands meeting with my new team on the 38th floor. I walked onto the operations floor, past my old cubicle, which was already being cleaned out for the next analyst. I looked at the analysts, some tired, some cynical, many just like the former me, and stood at the head of the floor, not behind the glass of an office. Good morning, everyone, I announced, my voice carrying clearly. I'm Jean, your new Senior Director of Operations. I know many of you are wondering about the changes. I will be frank, I was an analyst here for 5 years. I know what it's like to work here. I know the grind, and I know the feeling of doing brilliant, detailed work only to see the credit disappear up the chain. I paused, letting the truth of my words sink in. My focus, starting today, is simple: meritocracy and transparency. The people who do the work will get the recognition, the data will dictate the strategy, and the bureaucratic layers that slow us down and obscure the truth will be eliminated. I know where the weeds are, and I promise to be in them with you. Your details are my strategy. The effect was instantaneous. Analysts started looking up, not with fear, but with genuine, cautious hope. I saw Sarah, my ally from HR, watching from the periphery, giving me a silent, emphatic thumbs up. The corporate culture wouldn't change overnight, but the foundation was set. The team had a leader who understood the actual work, not just the politics. I finished my first week working 15-hour days, not out of fear or obligation, but out of exhilarating purpose. I was untangling the messes Henderson had left, fixing the reports, and most importantly, promoting the people who truly deserved it. My first official act was to move my two best analysts, both brilliant young women, into managerial roles with actual reporting authority, completely bypassing the need for a lazy intermediary. I often think back to that conversation in Section 3, where Henderson told me I was replaceable. The memory is no longer a source of pain, it's the fuel that launched my career. The entire journey, the secret job search, the risk, the incredible twist of fate, and the final showdown, was the most empowering experience of my life. It was a testament to the fact that competence is the ultimate currency, and integrity will, eventually, win out over ego. My journey from replaceable analyst to the boss who replaced him wasn't just about a job title. It was about reclaiming my value and rewriting the rules for everyone who came after me. It was the ultimate professional mic drop. So, to all of you who feel stuck, unappreciated, or told that your ambition is too bold, or your talents are too focused, remember this story. You are not replaceable. The mediocre people hoarding power are. Find your value, polish your skills, and when the opportunity arises, don't just leave, take their seat. If you love the story, if you've ever had a boss like Greg Henderson, or if you feel inspired to start your own Project Phoenix, please drop a comment, hit that like button, and subscribe so you don't miss the next time justice is served. Thank you for watching.